Well, thank you very much for staying with us. This is the New Dawn, and in case you're joining us right now, it's just in time for the newspaper review, where we have a look at what is making headlines in the local dailies. Now, before that, I just want to introduce my panelist this particular morning, and sitting right next to me is Mr. Odhiambo Otieno, a political analyst. A very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
A pleasure to have you this morning.
Pleasure. Now,
next to him is Nerima Wako, who is the executive director at Siasa Place. Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you very much for making time.
Thank you.
And of course, to my farthest right is Gitungo Wamere, the program coordinator at Mzalendo Trust. A very good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for making time. It's a pleasure to have you. Well, let's just have a look at what is making headlines in the local dailies, and I beg we begin with the Daily Nation. And the front page of the Daily Nation, they say grade 9 crisis. With less than a month to go, many schools are ill-prepared to admit grade 9 learners on January 6. While construction of classrooms to accommodate the pioneer learners under the competency-based curriculum is ongoing in some schools, the situation remains dire in many institutions. That is a story on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation. They paint a picture of what is happening across various schools in the country. Remember, this comes at a time when the Minister of Education just a few days ago did issue a directive to close 348 boarding sections across 348 boarding schools across the country due to failure to adhere to the Safety Standards Manual of 2008 in regards to the safety of students across the country, more so under the primary schools. Now, let me begin with you, Mr. Odhiambo. We seem to be having a crisis across almost every sector here in the country, but most crucially is the education sector, because if we're just less than a month away and some schools don't even have classes for, grade 9 students, then it leaves a very, very bad picture on the government.
Of course. Excuse me. The problem that we have with the government is the issue of the registry, number one, because the government does not know how many people are in this country, and so they're unable to properly plan for the students or for the children that we have, because when you talk about 348 schools being closed down for various reasons, it shows you that there's nothing called continuous monitoring or continuous assessment that will grant a proper or an enabling business environment for these kind of schools. So the other thing that we have to be aware of in this regime especially, and maybe also within the past two regimes, that is the regime of President Uhuru Kenyatta and the regime of Mwai Kibaki.
Okay.
We've had particularly one principal secretary who has overlived his invite. Mm-hmm. And there is the danger of having diapers on a kid for too long. It becomes saturated. Okay. And it cannot now serve its purpose as it should. And I think it's time maybe different brains are invited to help the primary education sector, to help plan better, because one person for too long reaches a ceiling and he cannot go beyond that.
Fair enough. Nerima, I don't know what to make of all this situation, because at the end of the day, just last week, the government did close 348 boarding sections across various schools in the country over, failing to adhere to the Safety Standards Manual. This again is a key concern, because we're just 3 weeks or so away from a reopening of schools, and learners are staring at a crisis. But if you look at these are learners more specifically in the public schools. For those in the private schools, they are well off. Everything is in place. That as well brings in some sort of disparity. Learners in the private sector will continue their studies seamlessly, but those in their counterparts in the public institutions will have a problem. But at the end of the day, they will be able to sit for the same examinations. What do you make of this situation?
It actually reminds me of 2020 with COVID-19, where we had a very similar situation. Students in public institutions were left behind because of being able to use alternative means of learning, which meant depending on computers or IT to be able to continue with their learning. And students in private universities or private schools were able to continue during that period, while we saw students in public schools being left behind. And I think that it's a worry, specifically when we talk about a population that is majority young, most of our population is actually below the age of 15 years old. And when you're talking about them not being prepared, there was a huge transition when we talked about CBC with this curriculum, and now we are seeing that they are not prepared for our children when we're talking about next year and entering grade 9. So for me, unfortunately, these same students went through that same anxiety in 2020. And now they're experiencing the same anxiety in terms of the country not being prepared for them in terms of learning. And it's unfortunate because we are well aware, according to data, the number of children that exist and the number of institutions that are required to be able to hold this number of students. So it's a matter of our leadership not being able to prepare in regards to using data and policy and being able to budget beforehand and be able to have these children be able to transition, and considering that they've already gone through a matter of anxiety 4 or 5 years ago, and now they're having to go through it again. It's unfortunate.
Okay, fair enough. Coming to you, Omere, I mean, the government is to blame, is it? Because they've had enough time to prepare. It's not like it's something that just popped up out of nowhere. This is something that they have been aware for a very long time, and failing to prepare is a shortfall, a shortcoming on their end. And I don't know if you agree with the sentiments of Mr. Odhiambo that probably the stint of the PS has been so long, and he was attributing it to if a kid stays with a Pampers for a long time, then there are side effects to be felt. I don't know whether you agree with that.
Yeah. I agree with all my colleagues here. And the problem that you're facing at the moment, it's not a new problem. And it brings up the issue of the transition that we had, and Nerima's talked about, from 844 to CBC. And even when we were doing the transition, there was an outcry all over that the transition was not well planned. You remember when the kids were transitioning from to junior high school. Now they are transitioning to grade 9. Similar problems occurred whereby we thought then that they will move from their primary schools that they were in, but they continue remaining in those particular schools. So these show us that the government has not been planning well. This CBC system has not planned well. And maybe even when there will be a transition of these kids to university, there might be a bigger problem because it's not a system that was well planned. And even the current government that is governing now, you remember one of their key campaigning issues then was to come and review how the transition from 844 to CBC was done, and if need be, maybe abolish the whole system. But when they came into government, they forgot about everything, and we haven't seen them doing a good job. And their response to the crises that have been occurring have been more of reactionary. So I think we are gambling a lot with our education system.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah. Now coming back to you, Mr. Odhiambo, there's a story on page 8 and they say why Kindiki is charting his own political path. Now, ever since Kindiki was sworn in as the Deputy President on the 1st of November 2024, he has only attended one public function with President William Ruto. Now, before the former DP was ousted, there were questions surrounding why his missing functions are attended by the head of state. But they say Kindiki could be a man who's, charting his own political path, because at the end of the day, when you are a deputy president, every deputy president has ambitions. Now, from where you sit, is it a matter of, aligning with his ambitions in terms of probably succeeding President William Ruto in 2032 or not, whether President William Ruto will be elected in 2027 or not, or is it just, a case of trying to, sort of stamp himself as the deputy president by not, probably following the president in every event that he goes, because he has been, even in church functions. We've seen Gachagua before, when he was the DP, attending the same functions as the president, but we've not seen Kindiki do that. He's been attending separate functions. Is it a strategic move on his part?
Let me say this. I'm very happy that the day Professor Kindiki was announced to be the DP, I was right here in this bench. And I said it then and I repeat it today, that appointed power is the weakest. It may seem strong because of the position of the office, but the office is never the real power. The power is the person who sits in that office. Kindiki lacks a particular type of a personality that can assert authority in public, or that can attract the level of admiration or legitimacy that comes with this office. As things stand, I don't think, and I don't see in the foreseeable future, Professor Kindiki charting his own path, because from which base is he charting his own path? He doesn't have a base. And since his position is very appointive, and I insist on the adjective very appointive, he lacks what I call the public legitimacy that then grants him the authority to speak, even with the gusto that he needs to speak with. Seemingly, we have a political vacancy in the office of the Deputy President to date. Yes, we have a substantive Deputy President, but there's some level of gap, and I'm sure even you can feel it where you're seated.
Well, I don't know. I don't want to give my comments on that. Coming to Nerima, do you feel there is a vacancy, political vacancy, like he says? Because the biggest concern has been, even ahead of 2027, can Professor Kithure Kindiki marshal the support of the Mount Kenya region and ensure that President William Ruto wins back that particular region? Because as of now, the concern is probably President William Ruto will have a tough task to convince the voters of the Mount Kenya region in 2027 to re-elect him, especially after the oust of Rigathi Gachagua. And one other thing, there was word going around that there was some sort of possibility of reshuffle within a purge of those allied to Rigathi Gachagua were supposed to be ousted from chairmanship positions in committees in the National Assembly. But there was a report that the president has sort of backtracked. Is it a move that you'd say is wise because he's probably skeptical about what will happen, the backlash that will come with ousting even more allies of Rigathi Gachagua who are from the Mount Kenya region?
Absolutely. I think that it's quite early that we're already in campaign conversation. It's actually exhausting. I feel like we just got out of 2022. And here we are already discussing 2027 and alignments and what that means. And people are already out and about doing campaigning, instead of looking at the crisis that the country is currently in. And Kenyans just want government to work and for them to be able to see the results of government. But to answer your question, I think it's going to be very difficult for him to do that, because even when you think of 2022 in regards to him campaigning himself, he didn't do much of the gallivanting that we're used to in terms of public rallies, speaking with the public. We don't even know how he is in terms of public engagement. There are people who have a style of how they engage the public. We don't quite know our current DP and how he's able to tune the masses and what that looks like and where his train of thought is and who his allies are in terms of his friends within government who speak for him as well. We don't quite see that path when it comes to politics, and in our current politics that's extremely important. But I do believe that it's going to be very dicey for government right now in terms of the choices that they have. We do know that in terms of performance, a lot of the public feels that they haven't been performing well, and they definitely feel that the taxes have been increasing. So the choices they make in terms of positioning is going to be important. People are going to want people with track records. And we know with this particular administration, it has been a lot of reward of the political class. So are they going to remain in the same trajectory? That's what I'm going to be observing. Or are we going to see a huge shift? So no matter what the president does, it'll be damned if I do, damned if I don't. He's in a very difficult corner.
Fair enough. Coming to you, Mr. Wamere, talking about elections. In Africa, we've had a tendency where elections are conducted today and probably we get the outcome of the elections 7 days later. Ghanaians went to the polls on Saturday, but as of today, they already know their president, because former president, that is John Mahama, has staged a comeback, and he won the elections, defeating the vice president, Mahamudu Bawumia. Now, does this set precedents for African countries? Does it show that indeed we can go for elections today, and a day later, we can be able to get the results?
Well, Ghanaians have been doing well in terms of their elections and in terms of strengthening their democracy. I don't think it's anything new in Ghana in terms of their elections, in terms of how they conduct the elections. And this time round, they did it so well. In fact, I saw Dr. Bawumia conceding the elections way so early. But again, the Electoral Commission there hasn't really come out to pronounce who has won the election. But political parties, in terms of how they are conducting the election, the Electoral Commission has already provided to them the results. And I think even them, they do the way elections are announced at the constituency polling station level. And that's how even Dr. Bawumia came to know that he has lost the election. And it's a good thing, because we have seen in Africa whereby people do not lose elections. All the times they are rigged in. It's a good precedence that has been set in Ghana, and we hope even in the coming elections, because there are quite a number of elections that are coming up. This year we've had quite a number of elections. I think the rest of other African countries will learn from Ghana and take elections just not like a cutthroat, a do or die scenario. Take it like a contest of policy, a contest of ideologies. And when you lose, you concede gracefully. When you win, you accept your win in all humility. So, and I think even in us in Kenya, in the next election that is coming, we will do better than we did in 2022. And hopefully even the problems that we're having at the moment of IBC, which it's long overdue, we will solve them in due course. Yeah.
Now, fair enough. Mr. Odhiambo, we're talking about IEBC, but even before we talk about IEBC, I just want us to look at the standard. And they say Raila's path to a days paved with intrigues. Raila Odinga, who's bid to become Kenya's president, failed, may soon have a better alternative. And finally, best tried the whole of Africa, but there is a mountain to climb. First of all, there is a debate scheduled for the 13th of December, where all the candidates will be engaging in a debate just to outline the agenda for the African continent. As of now, do you think Raila is in a better position to win the elections as compared to, because many people are talking about the candidate from Djibouti, Mr. Yusuf, being his main rival. Do you think Raila is in prime position to clinch that particular seat?
Well, I sit at a very privileged position to have access to information regarding Raila's bid, because I serve the Odinga family. I can tell you for sure, as at last week on Thursday, we were remaining with the 4 specific countries that were the gap for Raila to close this race. I will not disclose the countries, of course, but there are several inroads that have been inroads that have been made, and we are confident that maybe by January we shall have closed these 4 countries. Because the voting is tough on, again, what I call very specific interests between the Djibouti candidate, being that Djibouti occupies a very interesting position in terms of serving several countries which are driving proxy wars, proxy interest in this continent. But we are so confident that come next year, Raila will be the AUC Commission chair. We are very confident about that. Well,
fair enough. And Nerima, I don't know whether you agree with that, because sometimes we've seen even countries, that promised to vote for example, Ambassador Amina Mohamed back then, but on the voting day they failed to vote for her. Now, there are various dynamics. There are various issues. There's the issue of countries that, for example, francophone countries, voting as a bloc. There are very many other intrigues. Do you agree with Mr. Odhiambo that indeed Raila is in prime position to clinch that particular seat, or is it too early to call?
I think it's early to call. I find it difficult to see. I was speaking to some colleagues who are based in Ethiopia, in the East Africa region. There's a lot of respect for Honorable Raila Odinga. There's a lot of respect in terms of what he's managed to do historically when it comes to democratic rights. However, when you look at country, when you look at Kenya as a nation, We would not necessarily be considered so pan-African. There are a lot of decisions that our government has made where it could have been louder in regards to support for other African countries, and we have been normally silent historically, and so it would be difficult to have other countries to support. So it's going to take a lot of convincing, I believe, a lot of lobbying behind the scenes, especially during this period. So at the moment, I believe it's 50-50, but also when you look at the conversation online from Kenyans themselves, obviously not interested in that position for Kenyans. They are not. They want this thing not to go that way. But, you know, for country, we will see whether they are able to convince other countries to support. But when it comes to Francophone countries and Anglophone countries, there is definitely a lot of support that is entailed, and Francophone countries normally stick together. They do. And that's been historically shown, and the Arabic-speaking countries normally fall with the Francophone-speaking countries. So it'll be interesting to see how they are able to convince to vote for Kenya.
Fair enough. Indeed, I've seen Kenyans online. In fact, some of them were saying that if at all the Djibouti candidate wins, he should come and celebrate here in the country. But before I engage Mr. Omere, now let me just engage you on one more thing, on the outcome of that particular election and its impact ahead of 2027, because most people are talking about now President William Ruto with the slippery Mount Kenya region. He's the one who needs the Raila to win this seat even more than Raila himself, because if at all he fails to win, then it throws a spanner into the works ahead of 2027.
It does. I think that whatever happens in February will throw a spanner in the works. It changes the dynamics of our politics anyway. Because even when you look at ODM as a party, there's been a lot of restructuring and movement, because a lot of the major political players have entered cabinet, and we've also seen a shift in power. And we also see young political leaders now being more vocal and influential. So it now begs to question, what will Raila do? If he does not get the seat, what does his position mean politically? People are going to expect him to endorse somebody if he doesn't go for the position himself. So it does make a shift within the chessboard. So it doesn't matter whether he wins, whether he loses, it will change our politics in this country. It will.
Yeah, fair enough. Just before you take a break, in 1 minute, Mr. Omere, recent happenings, occurrences, including the abduction of Kizza Besigye in the country, is such a situation likely to jeopardize the election of Raila Odinga as the AAC chairperson?
Well, in terms of even the institution itself, African Union, and the presidents who sit there, what's their history in terms of human rights in their respective countries? Does it really matter to them? And also the particular seat that you're talking about, AU chair, for me, I think it's neither here nor there in terms of citizens, common mwananchi, impact on common mwananchi. So whether Raila wins or not in terms of politics of development in our country, there is nothing really much. So what it does, it's the chase, the game of chase of the political elites. And like my colleagues have said here, whether Mr. Odinga wins or not, it will change our politics, but not our development. So it is their game that they are playing there as elite. So in terms of any tangible change, any tangible impact on the lives of Kenya, it's neither here nor there. So even in terms of the limelight that we have given it, in terms of really, it doesn't really mix.
Fair enough. Now, because of time, that is where we wrap up the newspaper review. But just before we go, I alluded to the issue of 348 boarding sections closed across the country. The schools now say that they were unfairly targeted, even as parents support that particular move to close 348 boarding sections. Of course, that is in a bid to ensure that students are safe here in the country. Remember, most of the schools were accused of not adhering to the safety regulations, which include having grills on the windows, some of the doors opening inwards instead of outwards. Those are just some of the key issues that have been making headlines in the education sector in the country and made calls for more safety and safety adherence to ensure that students are safe. Remember, there was a concern, and some leaders were talking about should boarding schools be abolished purely across all primary institutions. That was a conversation that was ongoing. But finally, on the People Daily, they say least performing MPs. That is one story that will be forming basis of a conversation this particular morning with the likes of Oscar Kipchumba Sudi, the MP for Kapseret, and Makadara's George Aladwa, listed as among the silent members of parliament in the National Assembly. In fact, some were saying they're very silent in the National Assembly, but very, very vocal in the villages. Now, that will be immediately after this short commercial break. Don't go away.